That's, you'll have that problem there as the backup.
Let's call the Finance Committee meeting to order. This is a little bit different, similar to what we've done in the past on budgetary items and things like that, where we have invited the full council to be here and to participate with the primary topic that we'll talk about this afternoon is the capital improvement project and planning for the 2015 and forward. So with that, we'll start out with Mr. Okens. He's going to give us a little bit of a review, history, and primer on capital improvements. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In front of all your placemats here is a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, as well as some additional information that would have been kind of busy if we would have tried to make that into a slide. So I'll use both of those, and we will have those out on the website and have them electronically as well as we go forward here. So if you'll turn to the second page of the PowerPoint, you see here that this process has been kind of changed 2 years ago. We tried to do a better job of the capital improvement program. And the capital improvement program is all enticing, where it would include all facets of capital improvements, and there'll be a slide later in the presentation that kind of describes those facets. But this also is somewhat of a brief description of the criteria that the committee uses, and the first page of your other handout goes into more detail as far as the subcomponents of the legal mandates, the maintenance of existing assets, sustainability, reduce or offset costs, the critical public safety needs or concerns, and meeting city council priorities. There are subcategories underneath that. And the review committee, which is on the next page, has started their process for 2015. And so as part of your handout, we included the 2014 capital improvement schedules for 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 that was adopted last year. That's kind of a starting point that the committee goes by as we look at the 2015 and we review the items that were on that list, as well as any new requests and or projects that may have come up. Example would be the auditorium. We have a better idea of what the total costs are going to be there. So those types of things then, and their ratings may change based on those previous criteria. It may be more of a public cry to do a project. There may be less of a public cry to do a project, or there may be less direction from the council to do a project, similar to maybe some downtown work or any of the projects that were on that list. And that five-year capital improvement, again, is in front of you as well. But Bruce chairs the committee. We've had 2 meetings to date. We've gotten through probably about 25 to 30% of the projects. We hope to have maybe 2 more meetings and finalize it and get it here in the next couple weeks to Administrator Stevens, and then it'll be into the process. The next page talks about some of the funding sources that not only the committee reviews, but staff and the city has used in the past. Primarily, the bonding and the debt is primarily used for what was known as the street improvement or the 5-year street improvement program or the 10-year street improvement program. You'll notice that in the slides coming up that we've kind of relabeled that to pavement management. We think it's more appropriate because it may be more inclusive. It's not only going to include streets, but it could include parking lots, bike paths, anything else that may be bid with a street program or bituminous related. It may have different funding sources, may have some of the other funding sources that we have here. It may be a parking lot at the waste treatment plant, so we would use special revenue funds to pay for that. But it will be all inclusive in the overall plan, because it will be bid and reviewed hopefully at the same time that the street programs are. But segmented, similar to what was discussed at the last meeting. If you could, Dave, could you go back one slide for me, please? The excess prior year revenues, we do have those preliminarily at this point. It's a little under $700,000, and that was from excess revenues over expenditures for 2013. The unspent previous capital outlays are going to be about $100,000. So that will leave about $750,000 that the council, by past practice, has included in the budget process. The last 2 years, as we've improved the capital improvement program, have went primarily for capital improvements. It has not been for operating because it's kind of a one-time revenue, and so it's dangerous to rely on that to cover operating costs year to year. So it's kind of went directly to capital improvement program. And last year we had a little over $1 million that came from prior revenues and unspent capital. And as I'm going through this, if there's any questions, please just feel free to stop me and I'll. The special revenue funds, the waste treatment plant is an enterprise fund. We've talked about that. Those funds basically are restricted to be used for capital improvements for the waste treatment plant only. Lift stations would be a prime example where we've used it for the Western Collector, the Sperryville lift station. We're kind of getting into the lift stations now that we've gotten the plant relocated and that established. And so those next capital infrastructures are there, and that's where those funds are dedicated to. The loss funds, we've had those discussions. They have expired in 2012 and are going to be used at this point earmarked for the either bike paths, the industrial park, the ice arena. Those are 3 items that are in the 2014 capital list that primarily uses the remaining amount of the loss funds at this point. The bonded debt, that revenue, again, as I mentioned earlier, is primarily paid back. It's some people may think that that the pavement management or the street improvement program has this pot of money sitting there, and it really is not used as a pot of money to pay the capital costs or the direct costs. We actually do bonding primarily for that under Statute 429, and under Statute 429 you have to assess at least 20%. And 20% in order to bond. If you don't assess a minimum of 20%, then you have to hold a referendum by the voters in order to sell bonds to fund improvements that are outside of 429.
Will you repeat that for everybody again? So if we don't assess at least 20%, in other words, if we went some sort of a crazy program where we were going to tax and not do assessments, we would then have to have a referendum?
Yes, under state statute 429, you can't sell bonds under that statute. Now, there are some other things that are being worked on legislatively as far as the street improvement district and those types of things, but they're not materialized at this point. So they're not available. So that if you sell debt or bonds, even if you're going to levy for it, you have to have a referendum if there isn't at least 20% assessed under 429.
Okay.
And that would be each time for the.
That was each bond issue.
Each bond.
Every year?
Each bond issue. So if you do a massive bond issue, there are spend down time limits. So you can't go out and let's say sell a bond issue for 5 years of street improvements and not spend it down, keep it and put it in the bank. You run into arbitrage rules and violations. So you have a spend down time limit. I think it's about 18 months that you have to have at least 75% or 80% spend down. And that's why the city can do an improvement project, do the majority of the work except for the final lift, and do the final lift the following year. The council has taken that policy so that if there are any trouble spots, they can be dug out and you get a better finished product.
Okay.
Yep. The other items that we use to pay the debt are not only the assessments, but the Community Investment Fund. Community Investment Fund, and I'll talk about these in the upcoming slides. The Public Works Reserve Fund, that's the $4 utility fee that's charged to customers to pay for the street, water, sewer, underground, and storm sewer. Waste treatment revenues, I mentioned as far as the special revenues, and any kind of future dedicated levy or revenues that the council may choose to do. I know at one point we had presented when the utility, the Public Works Reserve was bumped up to $4. If you recall, Administrator Schmidt at the time had an alternative of possibly a third local option sales tax. Of course, there are steps that have to be followed in order for the city to be even able to implement that, and the main one is the legislative approval. But that was kind of a third revenue source outside of the Community Investment Fund and the Public Works Reserve, kind of a three-legged stool to help kind of further the pavement improvement or pavement storm or street improvement funding source. So if you turn to page 6, debt service, as I talked about, special assessment fund, we have a 10-year history of debt, and we have a slide again included in both the presentation and in your handouts that lists the 10 years of debt that we have, as well as the debt for the waste treatment plant. We did not include the overlapping or the component units of Rice Hospital or the municipal utilities, their component units. And those schedules are every year in the city's financial report, in footnotes in the financial report. So if you want more detail, or if you're looking for more detail on those issues, I would refer you to those documents. You all should have those, and they should be on the city's website. But again, revenue consistent as far as payments for property taxes and assessments. The assessments in Willmar have been very good as far as collections. The delinquency is very low. We haven't done any comparison to other communities, but that may be something that we use in our performance measurement or something like that, is do a comparison. But it's normally on current assessments, it's usually in the 97 to 98% range collected in the year that it's due. And in the following year or two after that, it raises it up to about 99% or 99.5%. The committee has very seldom had any delinquent properties or assessments. There's one area right now in Oslo Meadows that may be some, but other than that, the council doesn't normally have to deal with delinquent assessments at all. On page 7 is a brief description, and again, these descriptions are taken right out of your budget books. This is kind of, there's a summary page in each section of the budget books, and these are the narratives that are in those books. This fund, again, was established in 1990. It was established basically as informally defeasing a number of debt issues. For those of you that can remember, and I can, the 90s interest rates kind of, how do I want to say it, were rising. And there was some refunding, and even we did some refunding of some issues where the interest rates started to drop even in the 90s. The late 80s, interest rates kind of rose up real high. So there was some excess dollars in the debt service funds. And the council at that point took a model after the city of Minnetonka, actually, where we informally defeased those bonds, created the community investment fund, and used that as the primary mechanism to fund the city's share, or anything that was not assessed or collected through assessments. Now, those dollar amounts are levied. They are certified to the county. Each year, staff goes through and evaluates the dollars available out of the community investment fund, and basically does a procedure when the council adopts their tax levy resolution that decertifies those dollars. So, I mean, in that process, the council would not have to do that, but this funding source and the Public Works Reserve at this point in time are the mechanisms that make sure that there are dollars there, and the fallback would be to not decertify some special assessments. But that would raise your property tax, and past mayors and councils have chosen not to do that. That may be something that needs to be changed going forward, or another option available. But again, there you have the listings of the different priorities and the different criteria. And again, this is in your budget book if you want to reference it for more detail, balances and activity. The Public Works Reserve I mentioned earlier is the $4 utility fee. And again, we will be bringing an updated presentation to the Finance Committee and the Council during the budget process on that presentation that was done in the late 2010, early 2011. as far as where we're at. And we've had to accelerate. You may remember at the last council meeting when asked about, the effect that it would have to take out the overlay projects. And then we go back and recalculate. And what happens is it may need more coming out of this because the assessments aren't there from overlay projects. And so we'll do that during the budget process, and so you'll have more discussion and information on this. And again, these descriptions and dollar amounts are in your budget book. This page, I apologize, there's no page number on it, but it would be page 9, is basically a listing of all the city's debt. And again, this is the primary government. This is just the city. This does not include municipal utilities or Rice Hospital. It gives you the interest rate range of the debt that was issued, the date issued, maturity, when it matures, the original issue amount, and the outstanding as of 12/31. Now this schedule will change under the waste treatment. The reason that it will change is because of the Western Collector. That note hasn't been finalized yet, but we have drawn down about $1 million. So that will be a slight adjustment once we have gotten the final project closed out for the Western Collector, and then that'll be added to this. But at this point, the asset and the liability for the debt kind of offset each other. And again, this is in the footnotes to your financial statements. It's been in there every year. It's a requirement for us to report. Additional information is in there on the component units for the Rice Hospital and municipal utilities. Cash, we talked a little bit about where the dollars come from there. I mentioned them earlier on. Funds that are allocated from the 2013 budget, again, was a little under $700,000. And the unspent previous capital allocations, these may be due to projects coming in less than what was budgeted, or projects that have been determined that for one reason or another got prioritized differently. They may have decided that they could wait a year or two, and so it comes back into the budgeting cycle. But it gets cleaned up after 3 years, and we've talked about that as far as the charter requirements. Special revenue funds on page 11 are limited. Again, the waste treatment funds are limited to projects that are related to the waste treatment plant and its collection system and the biosolids. Those are the 3 areas of the waste treatment plant that, and the primary area that we're dealing with now in capital improvements is the lift stations. Western Collector, Lakeland Drive, or Midwest Campus, and the Sperryville, I believe, was just finished. So, and the lost dollars there, again, expired in 2012. So 2014 was the first year that it would have been even possible to have an additional one. I'm guessing that if the process was started at this point, the first implementation could be as early as 16, because it would have to go to the 2015 legislative session, and late 2015, possibly beginning of 16, if that is a choice. Page 12 again is just basically the totals on the long 5-year sheet that you have in front of you, and the different revenue sources that were projected to pay for those improvements. The debt service, the reason that was so large, again, is the big portion of that was over $6 million. That's on the Lakeland Drive or Midwest Campus lift station. At the time that the improvements, that was the estimate, because there was going to be a complete reconstruct of the street. That project has been scaled down to, I think it's a little over $3 million at this point. So those numbers do fluctuate a little bit. It just, that means that we just issue that much less debt. But that's the 5-year projection. And again, the committee that I talked about earlier on in the process, well, these numbers may get adjusted, and it'll come again to the mayor and to the council for their review again and or approval. Page 13, again, is basically the full concept of the capital improvement program. The first one there is the transportation or pavement management. As our committee met and discussed the street improvement program, we thought that maybe wasn't quite as inclusive as it should be. We should be maybe including parking lots, bike paths, those types of improvements that may be or would be bid at the same time or in the same contract as a street improvement. So, and I know that Public Works Director Christensen will be coming with kind of an updated transportation or pavement management plan. We did have one with his predecessor, Ms. Wilson, and it's kind of outdated, so I know they're working on that, and so there will be a lot of discussion about not only maintenance, but overlays, street improvements, and the possible funding sources that we're discussing tonight. The council in their 2014 capital improvement program put a marker in there for a facility review and or maintenance, kind of the facility plan. I don't think nothing has been done at this point, but there is a marker in there and some dollars. You know, there's been some work on the auditorium, but I think this was to be all-encompassing of all of our facilities. They've been included in the 5-year capital improvement plan, but not really they haven't stuck out, and they really need to be kind of discussed in maybe more detail. The vehicle replacement program I mentioned earlier, that staff committee has basically done their preliminary work at this point. The reason it doesn't come to the council and isn't forwarded yet is because it goes to the mayor and then his review with the administrator. But the preliminary work is done at this point. I think we utilized Chief Weifels because he's a guru on Excel spreadsheets, and you have to see this spreadsheet to believe it. But it's really good, and it gets passed on. So it was good that he was able to do that. Storm service water management. There's been markers in the capital improvement program. There is an adopted stormwater management ordinance. It's kind of been on the shelf, but there's been a lot of work done in that, and so that's another item, especially with the rainfall that we've had in recent days. It's getting higher priorities as the committee is reviewing them, not only from the council's perspective, but the public's as well. So, and some of those things will affect on timing and when we're looking at improvements, based on those criteria that you have handed out to you. And the community park plan, which was just kind of being formulated or worked on, that'll help discussion on those items as well. So again, Mr. Chairman, you have copies of the PowerPoint in front of you. They will be on the city's website. They'll be sent electronically. The second handout or information you had in front of you was more detailed description of the rating criteria that the capital improvement program is using to prioritize the capital improvement requests. Again, a listing of the debt service and then the 5-year capital improvement program. So.
Okay. Wow. I think that's a really good summary and update. Good for all of us to hear. Do we have questions on what Steve just talked about? Any questions on that? Councilmember Christensen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On page 12, what's the number on loss 2014? You've got a 4,605, and 2 zeros. Is it supposed to be 4 million, 4.6 million, or 46,050?
It was 4,605,000.
That's what I assumed. But
Yeah, the majority of that, again, I believe, and if you look at the detailed listing, the 5-year listing that was also handed out, the major projects that was doing was there was $3.5 million projected to be spent on the industrial park to basically get the infrastructure in up to and out to the power lines. There was $1 million, I believe, earmarked, $1 million for the ice arena. I think there was a couple other smaller projects for that, but they're all listed again in that detailed listing.
Thank you.
That would pretty much, except for the action the council took on that $750,000 of market value earmark, except for that $750,000, and there was, I know, discussion about Lakeland Drive bike path. So.
Any other questions? Okay, don't go away. What I'd like for us to accomplish tonight is, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of discussion that the council has not had the opportunity to present its ideas as to what should go into the capital improvement program. Now, we've heard that staff is not yet done with the 2015, so, what we might be looking at as 2015 that was projected in 2014, some of those items may come out. So I see this kind of as a two-step process where tonight we'll give our thoughts and ideas, and then we're going to have to come back after the committee has come up with their thoughts and ideas and try to reconcile that and come to some sort of consensus what size capital improvement plan we actually want to come forward with. So what I would like is for council members to talk about what they think should be in capital improvement program, be it for 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever you want to do. Now is our chance. That's what we wanted to do, is have some opportunity to put some things down, and I'm going to try to keep track of things, and we need to have a consensus on these things. But I've got a bunch of thoughts, but let's just open it up, and who's got some thoughts on what we should have in out-year capital improvements?
Give us a minute to kind of.
I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on the 2015 that was projected last year, because that's subject to change. They're going through that right now. Am I right on that, that could
Yeah,
could and will change?
That is correct. I mean, some of those projects will change. I mean, there were some projects proposed for the airport. There were projects proposed in 14 for the airport, which the state did not fund, so that may shift some of those those projects. What was done in 14 may not be complete, but you may want to look at some of the general areas to determine if those are areas of, there's some dollars that are allocated towards downtown. If that's no longer a priority for the council, we just need to know that so we can look differently at those dollars. And there are some other things, but I would agree not to get too bogged down into each small project or the detail of each project.
If I could add just one thing.
See what's set aside for leisure services in terms of parks or play equipment to determine with the park community plan if that would appear that we're going to have adequate funding, or if there is, again, a desire to look at increasing funding towards parks or increasing funding towards facilities. Things of that nature, I think, is what we're looking for.
And I think we want to go back to what, the second to the last sheet, where you said what staff is working on, the areas of focus for 2015, those five areas that we're looking at. So, Steve, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if I could, just an example that not to spend a lot of time on this, is that one of the things the committee has discussed at this point is throughout this plan that was adopted, the reconstruction of various locations or streets or the transportation pavement plan had a consistent $2.5 million. And to stay consistent at $2.5 million today and to have $2.5 million 5 years from now, you'd be going backwards. You wouldn't be consistently even staying current because of inflation and those types of things. So the committee has discussed about adding a 10% or adding $250,000 a year, so that out in the fifth year you're talking $3.7 million because, I mean, inflation alone. So those are the types of things that we're looking at as well.
Okay. So again, I'd like to get ideas from the committee. What things do we want to see in there? Then we'll reconcile with what staff has come forward with. But, I heard a lot of talk. We don't get any input. We've got ideas. All right. What are our ideas?
Are we looking at 15s?
If one of the things that I have is going to maybe be ongoing for several years, it can be an out year. Yeah, just what do we want to do? I mean, like, here's a thought that I have, just as an example, what I thought we could do. I thought that we should put some funding in for Vision 2040 projects. I don't know how we allocate it. I don't know anything, but I think we should have some place markers in there for when there are some viable Vision 2040 projects. We should have some money there. And I'm thinking that we should allocate $250,000 a year for 4 years, so that there's money there. And like I say, there's a lot of detail to be figured out on how it's allocated and just a lot of details. But I would suggest we have some money in there for Vision 2040.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
You aren't aware of projects that they're going to do that we don't know. I mean, As far
I,
as
I am, I know of one, and that's one committee that I'm on.
Okay.
You know, but I don't know that the committees have come up with a whole lot of specific projects yet, you know, and you think about Robbins Island, they're going to fund on their own the band shell thing, but they want to make that, the park plan was talking about making that a regional park. You know, now is that Vision 2040 or is that park plan? I don't know, but
These are taxpayer dollars we're talking about, and so to set aside $250,000 a year without knowing what they're going to do is, I question that, I guess. I mean, when they have some specific projects or when 2040 plans are made and presented to us, I would suspect then we would look at them in the out years or what we can do in the next year. I personally don't like the idea of putting, this is taxpayer money we're talking about.
That's correct. And again, it's a place marker. I'm not suggesting at all that this money pays for, in total, the ideas. Sometimes you have to have matches. Sometimes, you know, you have to have some seed money. I guess maybe I should back up and say, how do we feel about 2040? Are we going to support projects from Vision 2040? On a broader scope.
I don't know if that's,
Audrey?
I think it's okay to, I mean, we're talking general right now, but I think we can ask, I mean, that's being talked about. I'm serving on that Robbins Island one. And for example, they're raising the money to do that band shell. But we have found out that the utilities is in year 27 or something out of a 30-year. So we're going to have other issues. The parking lots are completely in need of repair. There's talk about if there's more traffic out there, how do you move the traffic in and out? So I think 2040, while they're working on some things, can certainly come up with some legitimate dollar or, you know, that come to us and say, we hope that you will work on Robbins Island. You know, in the park plan that was being discussed, we have done nothing with the pool at Rice Park. That pool sits empty, and we have said, don't spend the money to tear it out. But I think there are some things there that I think, I don't think they're visionary because we should have done something a long time ago, but I think there's a place there to say, okay, can we do that in 2015 or do we do that in 2016? I also see that 2040 is looking at least the things that I have seen of what can we do to raise funds. Look at the changes with the parks, you know, is there other money available, those types of things. So to say that there isn't a plan, I think there is. And I think, you know, you can carry the message back to them that we need to know the detail of this in order to put it in the 2015 budget, you know, with that. But, you know, I support your concept in that there's a lot of things there that need to be funded. You can't just, you know, it's still going to have to go through the process of being approved. But I think there's a lot of things there, you know, that are being talked about in different locations. You know, a outdoor destination park for playground, those types of things. So I do think there's lots of things there, and I don't know what other committees are up to, but I know that funding has been a concern from that group, and how do we carry it back, and who should be, you know, who should be responsible for some of those things too. So, you know, I think those messages have been sent back to the steering committee, but I don't know, you know, where it's at from the steering committee standpoint. So.
Mr. Chairman, this is a slide I believe you were referring to where it talked about the different aspects of the capital improvement plan. So some of these items, community park plan will be, you know, somewhat targeting those as they come forward, but there may be other areas that the committee didn't, you know.
And I think with, to add on to that, you know, with the community park plan, I mean, that plan is underway. There may not be a specific project, so it's a question, I mean, is that something we allocate again as a placeholder, or we put some dollars to so that what is recommended out of that plan. There are some dollars that might be able to do either small or large projects, I think is the question. Is that a priority for the council in 2015, or is it a later priority where the plan will be completed and it might be something that has to be worked into in 2016 or 17? I mean, those are some of the pieces of direction. I mean, right now, we allocate $30,000 a year to our parks and playgrounds. We have 37 parks, so that's less than $1,000 a park that we're currently allocated. I mean, that's what we've been doing. Is that still adequate?
And it may be as a placeholder for matching funds through the legacy funds or other funding sources. But in order to apply for that, you normally have to have a commitment or an earmark or something that you can leverage that with.
Mr. Anderson?
Just Councilmember Johnson.
With respect to the park business here now, I see there was 30,000 allocated for the park plan, but my understanding, some of that was for equipment, and some of that's going to be, some or all of it's going to be used for the study that's
In 2014, and we allocate playground equipment dollars, about $30,000 a year. Again, it's sort of similar maybe to the pavement management. We've not been keeping up with inflation on that, but in 15 and 16, you'd see that there's $30,000 that's allocated towards playground. I mean, the decision was made in 14 to take those dollars and use those for park planning to start to get a better sense of really what the needs are in the parks.
Councilmember Nelson.
Back, question that Mr. Johnson raises, I think part of that was looking at safety. We have some safety concerns in some of the parks with equipment that's from the 1950s. So the question is, can we afford to replace it, or should it be removed? Are we going to keep maintaining all of the parks at the same level they are? Do we change some to green space and change some to, different types of parks? But to deal with the safety concerns, and I guess that's a question I don't know for sure how that fits together. I think we don't have an ADA plan, if I understand correctly. We should have a compliance or a plan, how you get from being, here to there, kind of, and maybe Ms. Stevens can speak to that more. I mean, that's come up. I think just overall, that being compliant, I know we have streets that still don't have the handicap sidewalks done. I know that the Public Works did one out on 19th Avenue that had been a concern, but I think we still have others, I've been told, in the city, and that's something I think that I would like to see us adopt, that we get those done so that our sidewalks do meet the handicap standards. And as far as the plan, I don't know where we're at. I know we're running into that with auditorium, and anytime you make improvements to buildings, that has to happen. So I don't know if Ms. Stevens wants to speak to that plan or not.
We do not have, that I am aware of, an ADA transition plan for our facilities or our parks.
Okay. And is my understanding, anytime we touch a park, like, it has to be made ADA compliant, correct?
It depends on the level of improvements, but yes.
Okay.
I mean, and it's probably a good practice to have an ADA transition plan for the city, which would deal with not just parks, but would also deal with any of our buildings and facilities that have public access and such. And what is that plan for making buildings and making parks and such ADA accessible? It's not something that we have undertaken, at least to my knowledge, and I'm looking at the finance director who's been here longer than I, and he says no as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see the auditorium or senior center on here anywhere as far as expenditures.
We are
2015.
And that would be because I think when this plan was developed in 2014, we did not have a full understanding of the problems with the auditorium, and I think that's been discussed in the committee, as Mr. Okins can probably speak to that.
Yeah, the committee has looked at that. There still has not been supplied to the committee any final numbers as well, so it's definitely an item that will have to be rated for 15 based on the criteria that you have in front of you, unless there are other criteria that it's given direction to the committee. But hopefully by the time the committee is done, we have maybe some final numbers. I'm not sure what
But
the
it's recognized
timeline
as a
is.
priority of the council. I mean, the
Yeah.
committee's discussed, and it's recognized
Yeah.
as a priority of the council, and so
Yeah.
So
And we have identified funding sources.
for 14,
For
and
14,
if there's
you know.
ongoing projects, that they will be developed as
Yeah,
well.
the ongoing, yeah.
Yep.
So what we were handed here tonight, the 14, 15, 16, and 17, they're different than what we were handed
No,
the last one we had.
they should be the same.
This is the capital improvement plan that was adopted with the budget, I believe. It should be the same.
Okay.
Yeah, unless I,
This was the 2014, 15, 16 prior to this.
unless I grabbed the wrong file. It's a possibility, but it should be the same one that was adopted on December 30th.
Did we do any revision to that at all?
The auditorium was the main,
Yeah, there was a couple additional revisions to the very end, at the very end. There was, the downtown was removed, and I think it was added to the auditorium.
Auditorium.
Yep.
Well, my suggestion to this would be to take for 15, would be to take the Becker Avenue improvements and the developed downtown gateways out of there and put that towards the auditorium. Other than that, I would suggest that we set aside some money to go over to the fire department, tear that whole concrete slab out, the street in front of it out, and use some new technology foam below it and pour that street tire concrete and new concrete in front of the fire department. It's a mess. I don't know, we put up with it. You walk or drive over there, and it's just, that street is in terrible shape, and it's right in front of our very nice-looking fire department.
I'm wondering where that falls in our street improvement plan. Sean, any idea?
Mr. Chairman, I know that Second Street is in the plan. I can't tell you exactly which year it is. I didn't have that in front of me, but I have been told multiple times that that is, I think, designated for a reconstruct. I can't tell you for sure if it's 15 or 16, but I know it's fairly soon if I knew that, if I was to guess.
It's been patched, and I think it's been overlaid twice. I mean, it's just alligatoring. I mean, it's in really tough shape.
Right, and that's my understanding, is it is due for the reconstruct based on our management plan, and exactly which year it's scheduled for, I'm not entirely sure.
So you're suggesting that for a 15, a 16, a 17,
One of those 3 years. I mean, depending on how much money comes in, Sean's probably going to be asking for some more for streets for next year, too. It depends on when we can afford to put it in there. But I think that there would be something that's worthwhile. I mean, it is our fire department. They're trucking in and out of there all the time, and it must be a 10-ton road in front of it. But it's in dire need of repair, as is Second Street. I mean, between there and Candy High Avenue, you just ride a bike on there and you'll find out. But especially in front of the fire department, that's kind of makes that building look shabby. I would also suggest maybe using some city funds, cash, for another street project somewhere in the city that could use concrete with some level of foam below it. Maybe when they get over to High Avenue, when they start to fix that. I know that street isn't very old, but it's because of the moisture content below it. It's terrible. The storm sewer keeps rising up every year, freezing, rising, and it's buckling the street. And I mean, you got to drive to the left, and you're driving like this. But I would suggest putting some money aside to try a street out, a block, 2 blocks, whatever, using that money for geofoam on a street that's in really bad shape, somewhere where there's moisture, moisture laden. And I don't know what the amount, it would come from engineering, I guess, but I think that would be an intelligent thing to do, and we could try it out, and you see how it works for 2-3 years. We did concrete in front of Waltz. It cost very little, where the cars come out there, and you go over and take a look at today, it's not cracked, it's in excellent shape, and it'll probably last 20 to 40, or probably 30 years at least. I think we need to be on top of this. It's 21st century technology, and I don't know why we're trying to make our roads last longer, and I think this is one step in that direction.
So I just want to clarify something, Ron. You're not suggesting that we just pull a street that's not in need of repair as a demonstration project, you say at some point, a street that is slated for reconstruction.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to clarify that.
Councilmember Anderson?
Yes.
I guess I'd like us to do a study on that. I mean, I've heard Councilmember Christensen bring this up multiple times on a regular basis, and I know he's experienced some of those in Arizona, if I understand correctly. But
No,
maybe our new,
Utah.
city engineer could check to see what is being done around the state, to see if it's appropriate for us to be looking at that, and come back with a recommendation that if that's something we should try, that, to see what's being done in other communities, or what MnDOT and those types of things, versus just one person on the council's recommendation with that, so.
I think that's something that can flow through the committee process without any problem. Okay. Ideas? Well, okay, go
I'll
ahead.
have another one. I mean, we've talked about it, and we haven't done anything as far as over on 10th Street and Candy High Avenue. You know, this last rain we had, the water did come up close to these houses. Maybe there should be some money in there to purchase the next house. It's small and dilapidated, and expand that, what do we call it over there, Sean? Is that a retention or detention? That's a detention pond. Expand it. It's something that was suggested by the Stormwater Task Force, and I think, boy, did Holly bring that up too, Ms. Wilson? Anyway, we've talked about it, and it would be a worthwhile project because we're lagging behind on some of the suggestions from the Stormwater Task Force. We need to maybe
yeah.
revisit them with a new engineer, and then it's a step in the right direction. And you know, it's a pretty inexpensive step too, from
Well,
those other
again,
ideas
yeah.
that came up, but there were $10 million, and it wouldn't take much to buy a couple houses and expand that detention pond.
I don't know. I didn't drive down there this time, but the intersection flooded and the detention pond was full. You know, it's not going to get too much worse than what we had, I wouldn't think, here in the last 4 or 5 days. What was our result on that? I mean, we're getting a little off topic here, but it was brought up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I drove it a couple different times during the worst of the storms, as well as the smaller, relatively smaller one Thursday night. And the pond did exactly what it was designed to do. It was filling up as the intersection filled. Yes, the intersection was underwater. Most of the water was contained, if not all the water was contained, in the intersection and in that pond, or that was that lot. An hour later, it was empty, or a couple hours later, it was empty. So, in my opinion, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Okay,
Councilmember Anderson?
yes.
Not saying don't do that, but I took a drive around. There were a lot of other intersections that were underwater. It might be an opportunity for us to look at more locations that we have to talk about just stormwater in general. I know 2nd Street and Candy Eye Avenue was. We certainly have issues out at Baker Stadium. I know there were multiple places where I chose to turn around and not drive because the water was deep through the intersections, and the intersections were blocked. Olena Avenue was underwater. Our street was, 9th Street was blocked off. So I think there's more locations than just 10th and Candio High that should be take a look at to prioritize. You know, we're in a wet city. It's I think something we need to acknowledge and see how do we, what do we look at going forward. So
We were asked to give ideas, and I'm
Yep.
giving ideas, and you renege on almost everything I say. So I guess it was not, I guess I expected it, but
No, come on now. Now let's.
any ideas, it's just an idea.
It's just ideas, that's fine.
and Councilmember Christensen, I said I agreed with you on that one. I asked us to look beyond 10th and Candio High. That's
Okay.
all I said.
All right, okay. Other ideas? Rick?
I agree also, we should put money aside to buy properties that come up for sale in a flood area or that floods out. But I don't want to go buying homes on the spur of the moment, and then you have to pay relocation costs besides. If someone's a willing seller we should look at a property that would help hold water in and not flood neighborhoods.
I think that's a good way to put it, you know, rather than specify it. Just if properties become available in low-lying areas where we think it would be advantageous, that's a good way to put it. Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Storm surface water management, of course, would be number one for me. We have lots of potholes. More discussion, I think, in our city at the pancake feed at the fire department for Willmar Fest about potholes and when are we going to get potholes fixed. And we have a lot of them. And then also, several folks wondered about the wisdom of tearing up 2nd Street by the school south of Olena Avenue, why that was done so early. It should have waited until, they thought, until school was over, because it was really not a wise decision, is what the citizens that I visited with anyway. And then also we have a couple of excellent documents that I have been paying attention to that the city has been using, and I have not really looked at them closely enough, and it's a request for either committee or council action. And those documents need to be used more thoroughly to describe, again, what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that way, we can put them on our website, the citizens can review them, but we would also have the same data ourselves as a council. Those are nice documents, and I've really not paid that close of attention recently, but one is for committee action and one is for council action. They're good documents. They're part of our council packet.
Okay. You know, one of the thoughts that I heard mentioned at a council meeting was, should the city be setting aside money for economic development? You know, should the city have the ability to kick in money? I didn't advocate that. I'm not advocating that, but it's a question. There was a council member that is not here tonight that brought that up, and I think it merits discussion. Should we offer incentives of some sort over and above what we've got, or in place of, or something else? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Councilmember Anderson? Do we know what other communities do? Alexandria, Hutchinson, other?
The only one that I really know of is Shakopee, and they went nuts, and you know, they may have gotten themselves into trouble.
So we don't know.
I do not.
Is that something that we should try to find out before we talk about allocating money?
We can. I'll put that down.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, I'm sorry, I was writing. Yeah.
I have a thought on that also. I don't know if it's necessary to set aside money for economic development, as the city is in really good financial shape. And if something came along where we needed to help out, I think we discussed this at EDC too, I think we'd be able to step up and come forward with some money. You know, government in general tends to, let's set aside money for this. Let's set aside money for this. Let's set some aside for this. I mean, from city, county, state, federal. And pretty soon these funds get huge, and we're not the only ones doing it. A lot of nonprofits do the same thing, and they're sitting there with a bundle of money, and which could be used for something else. So I think we could step up to the plate as that happens.
Okay.
I know we could.
It's just an idea, but I'd like maybe Steve or Charlene comment on that we have, you know, if something came up, say it was the railroad bypass as an example. Do we have a pot of money that we can pull out, $10 million?
Well, the council has reserves, and we've talked about those reserves and their assignment, and if they're designated or assigned for purposes. And I talked about it briefly in the beginning of the presentation about the past practice of the council taking anything that is not designated or assigned for something and making it available for the current budget cycle. And moving forward for 15, at this point, it was the $700,000 that was in excess of from 13 and 100,000 from capital. That being said, there are other reserves and levels that certainly are open for discussion and review by the council. They have been set by past councils and past mayors based on recommendations from staff on levels that were felt were needed. We definitely will have those discussions as we move forward in the Finance Committee because we'll be presenting them to you. There are some legal obligations for some. When asked at the council meeting the other night, there is $1 million that is designated to cash flow. It's called the Public Improvement Revolving Fund. And that is basically so the council has some time. They can use that as a temporary stopgap or funding source until now that level can be increased, it can be decreased. There are other reserves that we've presented and levels that have been discussed in the past. There's $4 million for cash flow reserve. If the city were to have to pay all their bills in the first 6 months of the year. And so there are reserves. I mean, there's a negative $4 million cash flow, so.
Well, I think one of the things on, like what we did with the auditorium, we took money out of a couple of reserves, but we also said we have to pay that back.
That primarily is the Public Improvement Revolving Fund. There is a 5-year stipulation set by council as a policy to have that replenished within 5 years. And so you would have to have a funding mechanism determined within those 5 years. The insurance reserve that also was mentioned, that was a level set by past councils again, which helped the city increase their deductible, which then reduced the premiums. And those premium savings is what funded that $1 million over a period of years. And so those are the two primary ones that I remember being discussed for that.
Those were the two. And so you know, we maybe could come up with it. I still think it's an idea, you know, and we're just putting down ideas at this point. Building maintenance. I think we need to be putting money aside in the out years, substantial money on. I don't know what that amount is, but I think we are kidding ourselves if we think that we're not going to have to spend money on our facilities. So I think we should have money in there for that.
I'm concerned that whether we got enough set aside for the ice arena, that needs to be done out there, the auditorium, and the community center. You know, whether the dollars that we've allocated are really enough. I mean, I don't think from the estimates I've heard that $1 million for the HVAC system at the ice arena and the civic center is enough.
Yeah.
The estimates I've heard would be 1.6. So I think it is a good idea that we start building up some funding for maintenance.
And when we get the facilities study done, you know, that'll give us an idea. But I think in the meantime, we need to put some money in there for facilities maintenance.
Mr. Chairman, one more point of clarification on the fund balances and the reserves that the city has is that the city, we do present a report to the committee as far as the cash balances and those in the city's checking account or savings accounts or investments. And that level, one thing that the committee has to remember is that a portion of that is restricted for debt service, and another portion is reserved for the hospital debt as well. So again, we can maybe emphasize or break that out a little bit more detail at future finance meetings and explain that in better detail.
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a discussion on fund balances. It's enlightening. Any other ideas?
I don't know that this needs to be in here, but I would request that we take a look at new chairs in this room and in the room we meet in over at City Hall. I've seen people almost tip over in them. They're extremely uncomfortable from a back perspective, and I think they're very outdated. And so I don't know that it fits into the dollar amounts we need here, but I would have a request that we update the chairs. The staff have to be using them more than we are, so they're in need of updates.
That's an idea. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on under 1415. Almost every year there's the airport, some airport improvements on there. How much money comes from the state or federal aviation gas tax? What do we get each year? And like, what portion of these dollars is that?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that, at least from past experience in another state. The feds will kick in, on a federally eligible project, will kick in 90%. And I believe in this state, in the state of Minnesota, that the other 10% is up to the city. The other projects that are not state, or I'm sorry, not federally eligible are typically 80% state, 20% city.
I don't know if that applies to my question. My question is, you know, the amounts that we have here, I don't believe that.
If you look over on the right-hand side of that spreadsheet, it shows the amount that would be projected to come from the state, and the amount on the left-hand side would be the local share.
So way on the right is the state aid.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And the balance, the cash amount is coming from the city.
Yeah, if you notice in 2015 schedule that the NAV roads for the airport would be a total local cost. And so those are broken down proportionately. Now, I know that the pending final land release is right around the corner, I hope. So the amount that is covering operational costs at the airport now is in the $52,000 range. That's projected to go up.
That was the number I was looking for.
And
That's the operations.
that's the operation side.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to go back to parks if I can. You know, we're doing the park study. I think we should put money aside for park improvements. My thought.
Don't we already do that? I mean,
$30,000 a year, and that really doesn't. That isn't going to do much. You know, that we got 30-some parks.
I know.
You know, I just happened to. I was in Red Wing, and went to a city park in Red Wing that was handicap accessible. It was a gigantic, phenomenal thing. There, they listed all the donors. The city of Red Wing put in $100,000, and they had just lists and lists of people that also participated. But I envisioned something like that maybe as a regional park thing at Robbins Island. It was handicap accessible. It was pretty slick. We spent a lot of time there, but you don't get that for $30,000.
No. St. Louis Park did something like that also. They consolidated a lot of parks, so they have one huge one. I mean, everything is there, the pools, the parks, the ball fields. And they also took donations. As Spicer did something like that.
Yeah, they
You know,
did.
that one there, you go up and they got all their names, and I think it's in blocks of wood or something around it. I think that'd be a worthwhile project, too.
I think we should have money in there for it, and I'm sure we would be able to get contributors to it, and maybe it is just one big park. I don't know what the park study is going to show, but that really showed me what a playground could be. I mean, it was probably 4 times the size of Spicer's. It was full of kids, and they were closing the park that day because they were doing some street reconstruction, so everybody had to leave. But okay,
Councilmember Anderson?
yes.
I just want to take it back to, there is a group, I'm not on that group, but there are a group working on, in 2040 with that very concept. And people who would be willing to take the ball and run, and you're exactly right, they are looking for the city to make a contribution, matching or something, and they would go out and raise the funds to do that. So, you know, I think the park plan itself will bring forth maybe some good where things should be located and some of that, but I do believe there is momentum and people willing to go out and raise those funds, and we'll probably be asking the city to do a contribution.
Another thing that was brought up to me, wasn't my idea, but maybe it makes some sense, and that is, should the city be involved in any sort of downtown redevelopment? Purchasing old buildings? You know, we have the HRA, but it was suggested at one meeting that the city should be involved in that. That's a question. That's not my idea, but it was suggested by a council member.
Wasn't there a question about a downtown park or a downtown? I'm not in tune to that, so is that something that you're aware of, or was it Councilmember Amon that had talked about that? Or?
I think that a downtown park is something that I'm on one of the Vision 2040 subcommittees. It's things to do in downtown, and a park is something that they've talked about, but it's easier said than done. But it may need to be. Huh?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I personally don't like the idea of the city stepping in downtown and buying and doing something with buildings. You know, the EDC, again, has helped down there quite a bit. HRA has helped down there with funding for things, and there's some revolving funds that are eligible for some of these people to do fix-ups downtown. But I don't think that's our, it isn't our call, I don't think, as far as taxpayers' money doing that. The downtown property owners, always asking for help, but they need to step up first. I know that we had, there was some question on property tax and utility bills at Lakeland, and didn't know what he was getting into when he got that, and it's holding him back from remodeling down there. So I know he's going to be asking for some grants or some funding from maybe Historical Society or something, but I just don't think it's the city's place to spend taxpayers' dollars down there when we have streets that need to be improved, we've got potholes, we've got grass that needs to be mowed on a lot of yards in town now that isn't being mowed. I think the taxpayers' dollars can be better spent in the city where these people live.
Well, let me give you the context where it came up with the furniture building, and should something be done, the high rise put in there and really nice market rate apartments or something like that. Should the city, for instance, help in the demolition or something? And that's where the suggestion came from.
We did the rural tire,
Yeah.
thing, and then the city paid for that, and I mean, that was a big improvement if you drive over there. I mean, I think that was well worth the city doing that, but developing, and I don't know, nobody helped me on the streets that I put in, and I didn't come to the city, and I probably wouldn't have gotten help if I did ask.
It's a slippery slope, but it just a question. I mean, it's an idea.
And I think some money, we're going to have to look forward and put some money aside, either for improvements or for situations of raising some of these buildings that end up being abandoned or forfeited for non-payment of real estate taxes. I mean, there's a lot of buildings downtown that are not being maintained by the owners even. They're taking rent out of them, but they're not putting any money back into those buildings. And from a long-range viewpoint, I mean, I don't know how you get things to improve, but I'm worried that things might become worse. I mean, you drive through, you go to the cities, you drive through some of these small communities, get off of the highway, and Litchfield, you go right through the community, and they got a ton of vacant buildings on their main street.
Yeah.
Small town America is getting hit all over. I mean, it's just not good, and I don't see anything coming over the, can't see over the horizon, but I'm not anticipating anything that's going to help a lot of these communities with these properties that end up being, poorly maintained until they become a problem and have to be removed. And it's I'm worried it'll be a taxpayer expense. So I'm thinking, some kind of funds should be set aside, and whether they go for improvement or eventually used to tear down some of these buildings. I think we're going to face more properties such as the rural property.
Right.
In the long run.
And we struggle to find money for that. So how could we phrase that? What would be the phraseology that we could use? Do you have an idea on that?
Well, just an additional comment, Councilmember Fagerly talked about being prepared to buy properties if they would help with stormwater, but I think other communities are doing other things, and I know there's a group, again, back to 2040, but a group meeting on housing needs and those types of things, and we've had some excellent examples of some projects that are going on in other communities where the city has helped them gain. I mean, we've got some major, empty buildings, whether they be schools or, Bethesda will be looking at an empty location. And is there something, to look at what are other communities doing to help with housing? And some of those, I think that might be helpful for us to take a look at. Is there opportunities when something is available to be able to help someone else do something that helps our community?
Okay, I'd like to get this, Jim.
Do we have a policy on this, number one? Is there a policy to help, a written policy that the council will help downtown merchants?
Oh, I don't know that we do. I think.
If we don't, why would we not develop one then? So that
Well, I think if
we have a
these
guideline
come.
to follow.
Yeah, we would have to, if we want to do this. I mean, these are ideas at this point that we're just throwing out and see if any of them catch on. Do you have any thoughts, Frank?
I'm about past thinking.
Okay. Well, like I said, I think this is the first step. Then we'll see what staff comes up with for 2015 and 16, 17, 18, and we'll give our input into that. And then we'll try to get the CIP. I've got probably 8 or 15 things written down here, and I'm going to give that. And I noticed that Charlene was making notes as well, so we'll see if we can get any of these incorporated. I mean, all we want to do is brainstorm. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just curious, our charter, section 3.04, says that the mayor shall, that's under his authority, the mayor shall prepare or cause to be prepared to submit the mayor's annual budget and capital improvements program to the council. And for this purpose, all personnel of the city shall furnish to the mayor such information as requested for the discharge of this duty. I'm wondering how much the mayor was involved in this CIP that we just went over.
0.
I think that's been the history back for a long time, and I'm not interested in saying we shoulda, coulda, woulda. We're going forward.
Well, we need to follow the charter.
Yeah. And we will, our staff will. All right. If that's it on this, then I'm going to look at the Finance Committee, and we've got a little bit of an agenda to go through to get some work done here. I got to bring it up on my.
Councilmember Anderson?
Yes.
Just a comment, if we're missing 2 council people tonight, is there a time frame with if somebody else or someone in the community has a suggestion or concerns? Are we open to ideas until such and such a time?
Well, I think they should probably funnel them through you, and I should mention, pretty soon we will also be sending out the forms that council members can fill out for thoughts and ideas. Is that coming soon?
Yep, those will go out this week.
Okay, so if they bring them to you, then you can submit them,
Anyone.
and they go to the staff and the mayor. All right. Let's get into the Finance Committee agenda. I don't think there's anyone here from the public. The Wheelchair Blue Line Center, request for approval.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, included in your packet is a committee action form. The reason this item is before you tonight is it's staff's understanding that any items over $10,000 need to come back before the committee for approval, even though they may have been budgeted in the capital improvement program. This item did have a $30,000 appropriation in the 2013 capital improvement program, and again, up to 3 years after the appropriation, the dollars are still there. As you see by the committee action form, Community Ed and Rec Director Brizendine shows the estimated cost of the item to be $28,850. The second quote was slightly higher than that, and it's his recommendation that the lift, access lift, and install a vertical wheelchair at the ice arena be awarded for $28,850. Authorizing the mayor and administrator to sign the agreement with access lifts.
I'll make a motion that we approve the agreement.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Rick?
So is there a lift in the big part of the Civic Center already?
I'm unaware of that, but I don't know if there is or not. I don't believe there is. I don't know.
I don't believe there is. Well, wait a minute.
I don't know.
I'd have to check. I don't believe there is, though, in the.
So doesn't that one need one too? If
There's seating available on the main level. I don't think there is in the blue line.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that again. If there's seating on the main level of the larger arena, I mean, that would comply with ADA and allowing that we could designate some ADA seating and such there. If there's not seating on the main line of the blue line, it would be necessary to have some way of providing seating.
So this would be, so the people can get up on the south side where they have the concessions or the,
I believe that's the case,
Window
yes.
area.
I believe that's the case, it's that area that it's
but I
providing.
thought there was seating on the main level there too.
But I think once you're up in that area, I think you can actually get to, well, we can get some additional information for you.
Maybe if you could put that in the minutes so that we,
We can have
it'll
that.
be
for you.
reflected in the minutes. Okay, there's a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Now, the NU Telecom license agreement.
Mr. Chairman, also included in your packet, and I told Mr. Halliday that I would handle this item for him. This is exactly or very similar to the agreement that was just approved by the committee for Arvig construction to do a line. The map is in a slightly different location, but this is a similar agreement for them to use the city's right-of-way. Again, the council had set a fee of $2,000. It's just another vendor, New Telecommunications, doing very similar work to what Arvig did, and I believe it was for the county as well, to go to the library.
Move to approve.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion. Tim?
Mr. Chair, who are the customers for these operators that are coming in? I mean, is this, I mean, I'm just curious, what kind of, I mean, they're going to give charter some competition? And
It's my understanding that this is the county that's hiring these vendors to do the work in the right-of-way, I guess.
Well, isn't the library part of that too?
I believe that's a part of this.
Yeah,
one here.
because they got a new supplier or a new vendor.
Yeah, and I mean, and then I'm assuming all of this
'Cause-
installation, it says it's fiber optic, but I assume that's the
Yep,
case.
yep.
I believe the actual owner is the Kansas County, from what
Is it?
my conversations with Kevin is that NewTel is just the vendor that's putting it in.
Put the fiber optic cable in, and then the county's going to own it and operate.
That's my understanding.
That's the same with the, what was the other one for?
Arvig ran to the county's highway department.
The courts were going to use that too, I thought, yeah.
That's possible.
Audrey?
Just clarification, that first paragraph says that the city code requires a franchise, and the second period says the state statute prohibits city from requiring franchises, so, or I was
Where
trying
are
to
you
read-
reading on the summary or are you reading in the document?
background summary.
In the
Okay.
background, Staff.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's why we're seeking a
Yep.
license agreement.
Right.
So that's why we have to do the license, because the two conflict?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. That's what I was
That's the city
wondering.
attorney's recommendation to
Yeah,
do a license.
the action is not to do a franchise, it is a license agreement, yes.
Okay. Tim?
I have another follow-up question on that that I didn't ask. We have a franchise agreement with Charter.
And Intel.
Yeah, and Intel. And of course, because they don't strictly limit themselves to the right-of-way, they're in other places, as far as where they run their service cables and everything, I presume. This doesn't affect any change, or will it have an effect on that when that's up for renewal, or?
It's my understanding the difference between these license agreements and the franchise agreements are that the franchise agreements are revenue-producing for-profit companies using the public right-of-way. This is basically for a governmental
See,
agency.
I didn't look at those statutes, but they must mention that then, I presume.
I believe so.
Thanks.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? That passes. All right, the 2014 street improvement budgets.
Mr. Chairman, again, in your packet are revised budgets. This is a practice that we have done in the past where once bids are received and awarded by the council, we amend the budgets and bring them back for your review. The reason that 1403 is not included in your packet is 1403 was for the overlay work that was denied. But 1401 is for the reconstruction. 1404 is for the new construction, which is 12th Street over on the west side. 1404 is, again, the original preliminary budget was somewhat more. It was like 3.7 million, and that was not reconciled with the capital improvement program. If you look at the capital improvement program, it was limited to 3.5 million. So we're revising it back down towards the amount that was approved in the capital improvement program. There is actually no work contracted yet at this point, and so when and if that work would be under contract, we would bring back, again, a revised budget for your review. And the 1407 is for the street lighting to complete the Willmar Avenue, new realignment of Willmar Avenue lighting. And those, all except the industrial park, are contracts that the council has awarded, and so these budgets would reflect the actual numbers on the.
Do we need a separate one on each one of these? I know we had.
Historically, we have. I think it can be all done with one resolution. The reason we've done separate resolutions in the past is because of the bonding requirements. So I guess I would recommend separate ones, but.
All right, well then let's do separate ones. Let's do 1401.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That one passes. We'll go to 1404.
I'll make that motion.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. 1405. Somebody.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? That one passes. And 1407.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 That one passes. So that takes care of all of those then, right, Steve?
Yes, sir.
Is there any old business? Is there any new business? Hearing none, all of the work is done, the meeting is adjourned.